ultimately being an artist is, it's about making, but it's also about dialogue, right? It's about actually having a conversation. And so without that conversation, the pieces can't, it's almost like they can't be finished. They don't complete until someone else sees them and there can be a kind of conversation around them. All along I was interested in the arts, and even from being a small child, and really loved making things. I was always making stuffed animals and drawings and paintings and things like that when I was a child. And so as I got older, I was really dedicated to the idea of studying art, and so I took lots of art classes and was really actually started off as a painter, and spent a lot of my younger years trying to figure out how to be a painter, and until I figured out that I was really not a very good painter. And then I started experimenting with other materials, and slowly these sort of funny little experiments that I was doing sort of in secret became the primary part of my work. And so then I really was a different kind of artist. I was a sculptor building three-dimensional things, and then I got very into video and performance and did a lot of that kind of more media-based work. And now I really combine everything. I draw, I paint, I make sculptures, I make performances, I make objects that I wear in performance, I make video, sometimes sound, interactive work. I do a little bit of everything, and so that is actually a much better system for me. Really, the project and the ideas in the project really drive materials, and so that's how I got into making the kind of work that I make now. For many years I have taught. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico for about 20 years, and I taught there at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And New Mexico is a wonderful place. It's kind of a hard place to raise kids and find good schools and do other things. So my husband and I were both looking for a change, and I ended up here at Mount Holyoke, where I teach sculpture. So yes, I draw upon a lot of external references in my work. I use narratives in particular. I'm really drawn to stories. And what draws me into a particular narrative, I think each time it's slightly different. I think there's a moment where I'm thinking about something, or I'm reading something, or I'm watching a film, or I'm looking at art, and all of a sudden it's a little spark that goes off, and it's something that stays with you as you're walking around and leading the rest of your life. And I realized over a course of weeks or months that I have been thinking about something sort of pretty consistently. And so I wouldn't say that all the sources correlate. It's not like I'm looking for something in particular, but a lot of them come back to experiences that I have had in my life and things that I'm interested in. And so there is a sort of thing that ties them all together, which ultimately is me and my interests, or things that pique my curiosity. But I think each one is such a unique journey to me that it's hard for me to see sometimes the connections between them. So most of the work that's here is still drawing upon the Western films, and that actually came out of a really particular family narrative. So I come from a family that is really historically based in the West. My grandfather was a large animal veterinarian in Colorado. My great-grandfather on the other side actually was a rodeo doctor. And so the West and the mythology of the West and stories of the West have always been a huge part of my life, even when I wasn't living in the West. And then, of course, to live in New Mexico for 20 years, you're sort of really a part of that culture. And this work all came out of a story that my grandmother told me about, a film that, a Western film that my grandfather had worked on as the veterinarian, taking care of all of the horses. And in the film, he was asked, they wanted to have a scene where a horse died. And so he was asked to anesthetize the horse. And so it would actually like fall and die on the set. And then he was supposed to stay with it and make sure that it came back. And so I was really interested in this narrative of my grandfather and this moment where in the film, which I eventually found, that he sort of, I can watch the scene and know that he's standing right outside of the frame. And then also this idea of sort of the epic narrative of the West, and how even in this very personal story of he wasn't even in the film, but that he's sort of playing God in this moment. And I was really interested in how that story really encapsulated all of the complexity of the West that I experienced living in New Mexico for so many years. You know, it's an incredibly beautiful place. There's an incredible sort of romance and mystery to the landscape and the light, and then the history of the West is one of incredible violence and racism, and I think about things like Manifest Destiny and how I see that as being the root of a lot of the political problems that we're having today still. And so I started to think about how to make a project thinking about Western films, but also thinking about all of those different complex ideas, and somehow, like, could I create performance and drawings and objects that combined all of those really complicated forces together. Something very beautiful, something very romantic, something sort of epic, and then also something violent and difficult. And so I think it sort of has sort of spanned into now several years of work, thinking about both performance and objects, and video came out of that as well. So that's just one narrative, but it's sort of like this long journey. And so each one of these narrative sources that I use really feeds my practice for a period of several years usually, and I go in multiple different directions with it. Often as I we're talking about the sources and narratives that I use in my work. So I'm often working in large series. So I'm generating a number of projects based on a certain narrative, and then they all hopefully come together at the end, or it might even be shown several times in several different iterations. And so each piece is interesting because I try not to plan too much as I'm starting out. I'm really, with each piece I'm trying to experiment and allow for materials to give back information to me and guide where the project goes and what the piece ends up looking like. And then I think there's a moment where planning and a kind of almost like a directorial kind of thing comes in when I start to think about putting them together in an exhibition. And then I really am starting to think about the experience of the viewer and how I want them to move through a space or move from one piece to another, what I want their overall experience to be, what I want their takeaway to be. And I often really want it to be something immersive, if not visually immersive, like installation. I've worked in installation at times in the past. Then I think on the other side of that is also something that is like a kind of a thought experience, and so I want to immerse them in a kind of thought process that I've gone through. So in the past I have done things like created spaces where I then show films, or I have a discussion with someone, or I bring someone in to give a talk or something in my show, because I want there to be a kind of integration of the way that you're looking at art, but also thinking about the ideas that I'm trying to get at in the work as well. So that definitely begins to be a very complicated process. And in each one of my pieces, each one of my larger projects, I feel like I can get in my studio to about 75% complete. And then there's really this last 25% that happens once I move into a space where I'm going to have an exhibition, where even before I start installing, where I'm talking to the people who run that space and the community who's there, and trying to figure out, what can we do? How can we make it immersive? How can we, am I going to have a performance? Is there going to be some kind of an event? Are we going to show a film? Are we going to bring somebody else in to talk? And that's really part of the fun experience for me. I think to ask me what are the artists that inspire me today, it would be completely different 2.5 weeks from now. I would be thinking about something completely different. So I think, right at the moment, I have spent the last couple of months thinking about figurative artists. I feel like my work sits in this really interesting position, at least for me, between being figurative and being abstract, and so I'm always sort of thinking about both fields, but I'm often thinking about artists who are working in ways that it is sort of bridging both of those things. And I think this has been an amazing year for some artists to really emerge in a big way that is really exciting. I think it's hard. That's a pandemic thing, right? Is that we're all in this kind of silence, and I think for artists, it's actually in opposition to what we do. We're in conversation all the time, and so yes, periods of silence are really, really important to make the work and figure out what you want to say, and then without the ability to be in a space with other people, it's almost like I feel like for the last year I haven't been an artist, and it's weird because I feel like I have tried to be a professional artist since I was in my early 20s, and this year I felt like I wasn't, and it's really weird. So I'm just at the beginning of starting to think about this project. I applied for a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellowship and was lucky enough to get that. And it gives me a month of research, and the place that I'm interested in being is the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, which is on the Harvard campus. And it is the old, what was originally called the Harvard Observatory. And the thing about that is, so this is how the narratives kind of start in my projects, because I don't really know what I'm going to make in this project, but I'm beginning to think about, in particular, in the very early days of the Harvard Observatory in the late 1800s, the director there hired women to do a lot of the analysis of the photographic plates that they were taking from their telescopes, and also the mathematics that went into that, and they called them computers. And so there was this whole history of women computers at Harvard who were often very well educated. They came with undergraduate degrees, and through their time at Harvard often worked through Radcliffe to acquire advanced degrees. And so these were some of the first women scientists in America. Making and spending time thinking about these ideas is really just an important important part of my life, and I need it in a kind of daily way. I maintain a daily practice. I try to work every day, even if it's only for 15 minutes. I think to be a mom and to be an artist is like, I'm very good at 15 minutes. I feel like the pandemic has reinforced a lot of those ideas. I'm really anxious to get out into the world again. I think that's the part that I miss. I miss working with other artists. I miss going to research places. I miss the travel. I miss the install. I miss the being out in the world with my work. At the same time that I love having the door closed. So I think it's complicated, right? There's been good and challenges, and I am just so hungry for the moment where we can all be together again.